Hi, friends, and welcome to Talking with Famous People. My name's host Eric, and I'm still kind of playing Sleepless in Seattle here. I got no more than 3 or 4 hours of sleep at most, less than 4 really, last night. Um, I'm not sure why. I wasn't brooding about stuff going on or anything. I just felt maybe like Rachel normally feels, like too aware of everything going on around me in the moment, bothered by little noises, unable to get lost into my imagination like I normally do as a means of going to sleep. So finally, about 4 in the morning, I got up and just said, okay, well, I'll take my Adderall for the day now. And it didn't really wake me up that much, but it pushed me into the day, I took a drive. I like to drive around aimlessly, look for things that seem neat to make a little video in front of or whatever. Hi, Andre. But what I've been reflecting on the last little stretch of time here is how the lack of a correct map of human consciousness heretofore is really what's to blame for all the sniping between people. So this emerges from some of the exchanges that occurred last night in the live stream where somebody's trying to basically establish that black and white thinking is bad, and or that the self can't be contained by it. So if we lived in a world where we had things correctly mapped out, how would it look differently? And there was general consensus on it. How would it look different than it does in the status quo? Well, we'd explain to all action types that they are action deliberators, and that implicit to all 4 action types is this certainty that other people won't tell me what to feel or what to do, what to think mostly. Other people won't tell me what's correct. Other people are not going to tell me what to think. I'm going to figure it out for myself, meaning I'm the one who's responsible to make determinations about things. Because I'm an action type, and I naturally am going to be impactful either metaphysically or physically. In other words, either in my words or in my concrete realities. I need to be allowed to do my deliberation. I'll talk to you about your thing here in a second, Ayush. What happens a lot then in terms of conflicts is going to happen a lot between different kinds of action types who are, each of whom is insisting, no, I'm the one who decides what's correct. The thing is, the different action types are designed to decide what's correct only about certain kinds of things. And without a map to allow them to understand how their configuration optimally manifests, how it non-optimally manifests, and how to tell the difference. Action types will simply project that notion that I decide what's correct onto everything. It happened when I was young and I was a TI tool user, projecting my way of deciding what's correct applies to everything onto relationship partners about their feelings. What you need to do is stop feeling things and start thinking logically about them. Well, of course, they don't need to do that. They're never going to do that. And additionally, it's only even remotely normatively correct when you specify a bunch of contextual things that allows us to say, yes, this is a matter that's appropriate for a public kind of parsing. And so arguments that don't adhere to, that are reliant either on warrants of a particularist nature, arbitrary stuff, that fail to uphold the good citizenship processes of public discourse, are not going to be helpful at all in determining what's correct for everybody. That only not all of the action types are going to be good at determining what's most correct for everybody. Some of them are going to be much better at determining what's most correct for themselves, and then hopefully taking that kind of action. The challenging ones are actually the conflicted ones, ESTP, ENFP, which means, I don't mean they're conflicted within themselves and like, oh gosh, I don't know. I should say the balanced ones, really. For ENFP, they're taking action to communicate to everybody about, in ways that are public, and that we ought to therefore address with objective kinds of judging. Matthew Alistair comes to mind as somebody who came around the other day and was very wrong in his statements about what everyone should believe about the world. But was unable to understand why he was wrong. He was wrong because he was putting NI before. He was trying to skip the deliberation part because he got that FI doesn't work as a public justification, but he's still fundamentally a knower, an actor decider. So he still behaves as though he's the one who decides what's correct. Action types are, I guess that's right, yeah, ENFP, ENTP, ESFP, and ESTP. Yeah, so EXXPs. And there's a jurisdiction where his approach to deciding what's correct, that's to say, strength of conviction plus intuition, that's probably an extrapolation of personal experience, is the correct, the best, the optimal way to decide what's correct. There's a certain land that's carved out where that's appropriate. I don't know exactly what it is. I guess it has something to do with compromising, but I'm not exactly. I'm not interested in gerrymandering out the specific boundaries of each of these things exactly. the point is, if we had all been raised in a world that began its understanding of the world and humanity with this correct map of how people differ from each other, then all those specifics can be all eventually articulated out. But instead we begin with this false map that says every individual is an example of one kind of thing, a person, and we can basically expect or treat them as having features like a product. Well, this car can both go super fast, accelerate quickly, and it can even in a pinch tow things. Plus, it's got super comfortable seats, even though it's a working vehicle. It's got air conditioning, and it's got, it's like people are fundamentally not like the things they make. People, identity-wise, are necessarily an expression of trade-offs in a way that things we make aren't necessarily an expression of trade-offs. What is happening functionally when those guys who can't function socially get women, get angry, and lash out at other men, women, maybe even violently? I mean, you're asking what's going on with incels. What's going on with incels doesn't actually link that strongly to functions. But it does link to the problem I'm articulating, which is the way that we engrave wickedly identitarian norms on our younglings because we don't understand who we are. The way that parents do that because they don't understand who they are. The way that teachers do that because they don't understand who they are, right? It's like when Jeffrey's teacher is making it very clear to him that he's going to get in the way of Jeffrey solving the problem that Jeffrey wants to solve. Jeffrey's trying to figure out how to get an A in this class and is going to do what is required to do to get that A. But he's going to be approaching this matter from using his tool function and his dominant nature. He's an ENTP. So he's going to be asking the teacher questions to pin them down so that he's got them trapped so that if he can meet that criterion, show that it's been met, and then they're going to have to give him an A. Everybody in this picture is all fucked up, right? We begin by recognizing, okay, you've got a prisoner in youth prison camp who, for reasons that the prisoner himself can't meaningfully articulate, that don't make any sense, is caring a lot about the validation of this other person because they've accepted this idea that it's not the validation of the other person, it's rather something that goes on your permanent record that other people are going to afford legitimacy. It is that, to some extent, but the reason it's that is because those people are all wrong too. They don't get that it's an individual arbitrarily grading the person. When you have teachers who are teaching soft subjects like English and stuff, and they're refusing to provide you an operationalized rubric, something you can actually do something with to guarantee that you're going to get an A if you meet these criteria or something like that. The teacher, no doubt, believes they're retaining the capacity to intuit holistic things, but really they don't know who they are. The teacher doesn't. The teacher doesn't understand that I the teacher am offended by this person's being because he's treating these matters that I'm talking about as though they were subject to his determination about what's correct. But the problem is they're not. They're subject to my determination about what's correct, and or that's not for individuals to do, depending on what type of teacher is, Probably it's another action type that's coming afoul of Jeffrey. So it's probably an ESFP teacher, an ENFP teacher. One of those two is going to be most likely to do this phenomenon of thinking that they can have it all ways. Such a teacher themselves might say, listen, stop worrying so much about your grade. As though they had nothing to do with this fucked up system that they're actively practicing every day. And that the correct thing, that the student shouldn't worry about their grade, is an acceptable argument for them to make in this context, right? It's absolutely not remotely acceptable argument for them to make. If you're a classroom teacher who's handing out grades to students, and you are not allowed to make the argument that you shouldn't care about grades because grades are stupid, because if they're so stupid, stop giving them, right? And they can't pretend that they're objectively comparing you against anything if they won't operationalize a rubric such that the student can guarantee to themselves that if they meow, 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 they will get an A. It's in subjects where the teachers don't like to give tests, right? Like to give writing assignments and then give feedback about how it could have been different to justify whatever they arbitrarily want to give as a grade. So I think what's happening with those incels is they've internalized this idea that to be a man, to be accepted as cool, kick-ass, okay, it requires you to be adept at slaying the puss. It's a position that I internalized for many years too. Like, I had issues with I had fears about my own masculine legitimacy because I perceived myself as reproductively non-viable option, and I didn't get. I mean, the thing about getting chicks is it's not about really anything except knowing in no uncertain terms what you want in the moment. And the issue with incels is they know what they want in the abstract, but it's never applicable in the moment because, of course, nobody ever deals with women. They're dealing with another individual person. Incels don't begin with the idea that before I start complaining about chicks, maybe I should really like this one girl and and try to make something happen or not, but they don't want it to be a particularist issue, because then the burden is where it belongs, on them, right? They want to make it a systemic problem they can't overcome, because then they don't have to do anything to fix it, and they can just wallow in this sense of victimhood. Do I think it's okay for university professors to insert their own politics into their lessons, lectures, even when it isn't relevant? Well, to me, it sounds like a good time, you know? It sounds like juicy, fat, old, disabled deer running in front of a lion. Stumbling in front of a lion. Because to my ears, it sounds like you're just opening up reciprocal burdens. Well, if it's okay for you to talk about your politics here in this lecture, then surely it's okay for me to raise my hand and critique them. No, sir, you don't have any further legitimacy in controlling the frame of the narrative, because you abused your arbitrary authority over that frame of the narrative to insert a political discussion where it doesn't belong. So now we're going to have that political discussion, and I'm going to shame the living fuck out of you by revealing just how stupid and fucking wrong you are. And remember, you bought this. You ordered it and paid for it and demanded I give it to you. I mean, here, Len, that's the thing. It's not like incels would be happy if they were actually out slaying the puss, because that requires another form of particularism of them that they don't want to do either. It's like when Kimberly told me something, and it really opened my eyes. I was fussing at her about her failure to respect my feelings about sex, and that it was important to me that she not say negative things about sex with me or my performance or whatever, and that I wanted her to say things like, "Wow, you really knocked my socks off." And finally, eventually, she said to me, "Eric, you really want me to tell you that, like, you knocked my socks off, but you don't want to do any of the stuff that would knock my socks off." And I'm like, oh yeah. You know what? Eventually I realized, oh, I would much rather be a selfish lover than a good lover. And I don't get to have it both ways. You can't have it both ways, you know? But to me, I was thinking, I want the statuses, because that's all that matters, or statuses, not realities at all. And I'm bipolar, S-I-4th. I'm assuming you don't know what you want or think it matters how it feels. Just like I don't know what I want or think it matters how it feels. I just know that I know what I don't want. I don't want to have to do anything. I want to just lie there and be lazy and be serviced, you know. I'm like the girl, right? I just want to have to lie there and, you know, you could say, like, from a guy's perspective about chicks, like, what are you complaining about? You just have to lie there. But really, I want to be the girl. I just want to have to lie there and not do anything. Not get all like, oh, let me do this to you, and man, I don't care. Just start sucking my dick already. Just get down there and start sucking, woman, and I'll tell you when to climb on top and hump. Okay? I don't want to have to meow you this or meow you that, or just do your job. Yeah. Does that make me a good lover? No. It makes me somebody who's benefited from recognizing the reality about the world. It's nothing but trade-offs for a human being. Even in the things we make, broadly speaking, we're talking about trade-offs. I can make a great, energetic rock song, but then it can't also at the same time be a great song to listen to when you're feeling sad and self-reflective or something. Can you talk about what it's like to be a TE Dom, TENI, and how they go about their days? Can they ever be lazy? Maybe not from a third party's perspective, but from their own perspective, they might see researching investment strategies as them killing two birds with one stone. I'm relaxing, I'm being lazy, but I'm still getting something productive done. They don't get what probably the concept of lazy is, really. If they are, from a third party's perspective, being lazy, then they might self-identify as depressed, or there's something wrong with me, or something like that. So the thing about incels and such is it's not so much about their cognitive stack, FE or SE, as it is about their having internalized FISE narratives as universal. And to do what we all do when we are attacked, ultimately. Try to figure out who the enemy is. Of course, none of those guys were attacked by women at any point. Some of them may have been subject to attack by individual people who were women, but it's their refusal to deal with individual people that causes them to be so committed to this work of fiction that they have adopted as some kind of life philosophy. Delilah was talking to me a little bit about incels and on World of Warcraft, and she was saying how they even call themselves incels. So it's like the reason they call themselves incels is because they want to highlight the fact that they are involuntarily celibate. They're not celibate at all. They are instead not sexually active. Celibacy is a decision to abstain from sex. You can't involuntarily be celibate. The problem with correctly naming what they are is that it puts the onus where it ought to be on an individual making his way through a complicated world, trying to find another individual with whom a healthy, happy relationship can be made. Most of these incels have no real desire whatsoever to slay the puss. They just want a girlfriend to love them, And they don't get that. Because that's too painful. Whereas women are horrible, and the sexual economy of nature is such that it precludes people like me from being reproductively viable. That's just insanity. I'm sure they do have a lot of fun at their He-Man and Woman Haters Club parties, talking with other dudes about how shitty chicks are. There's definitely a satisfying kind of feeling from hating on some make-believe enemy and feeling like, yeah, I really got him. Of course, the enemy's not entirely make-believe, because let's say they start talking like that kind of talk around somebody who happens to be female. Even though they're not talking about her specifically, she does fall under the set category women, and so she's going to feel attacked. I've also seen guys who had a lot of attention from women and people who, but were kind of asocial and not interested. I wonder if they're opposite incels. I mean, yeah, I guess it would be asexuals, or asexuals are people who are trying legitimately to claim their disinterest in sex as okay. They're saying, look, we've all been told these narratives about how hugely important sex is, among many other things. You know, everybody, all the different frames of reference have their thing that's supposed to be very important, and they're all right, you know? And yet, because of the nature of reality, they're only, if we take what they're saying as advice or something, then it's going to be horribly wrong for at least half the people, maybe more. So, I mean, the way that people talk about sex in general, and the way that it's so ever present and stuff, and the way that it's converted from this private thing into a way that rappers establish they're cool is by talking about how many chicks they sleep with. This whole alpha male thing. Ranging from toxic expressions of it to totally non-toxic expressions of it. Like, there's this meme of that, I think it was like Nice Guy Chad or something. It's just some picture of a dude standing with these two incredibly hot, like, co-eds, and they're both kind of like looking at him like, and now you're going to fuck us both. And he's kind of like, now I am. And isn't that great? Because we all love doing this stuff. Well, that's that guy, right? The thing is, he's got a trade-off too. So he may be fucking those two chicks, but he's not explaining to you all why he's fucking those two chicks like I am. The reason I can explain to you all why he's fucking those two chicks is because I'm not fucking those chicks. I get to have this time to explain things instead. The problem that incels do is they're making a bad deal. They're exchanging not fucking those two chicks for complaining about not fucking those two chicks. That's a terrible deal. You might as well just fuck those two chicks then, if that's what you're trading in for. I guarantee you, if you want to make sure that whatever naturally occurring sexual viability you may have is not recognized or afforded any legitimacy by a potential sexual partner, be an incel. Talk about how horrible women are all the time, and sure enough, wow, see how horrible they are? None of them like me. Well, that's because you make it very clear that you don't like them. I really don't like you because you don't like me and I like you so much. It is the case, of course, that there are some genuine sexual politics stuff that's fucked up, you know? I'm making a pot of coffee. What immediately comes to mind, and the most legitimate kind of complaint that incel types might have, is that men are treated unfairly by the courts in terms of custody stuff, divorces, and things like that. But I mean, ultimately, that too that too is about individual people, even though it might seem like it's much less so. You might think, well, okay, these court inequities, at least, that's not about individual people, that's about structural problems, right? Not really. It's not so much that the laws themselves are unequal to men and women in family courts and such, as it is that usually both people are unequal to the forum. A court is an accountability forum, an accountability arena. And unfortunately, to be successful in that accountability arena, you need to be able to both be accountable, hold yourself accountable where appropriate, and be very good at articulating, highlighting how the other person's accountable. So I never had any such problems with my divorces. My second wife, who was NI-polar, not a bad person, but was inclined to do something very terrible to me. But just purely out of NI-polarness, not out of wickedness at all. She said, well, I guess we'll need to go to court and, establish alimony and stuff like that. And I say, what are you talking about? Well, that's what people do, isn't it? I'll get a lawyer, I guess, and we'll figure out how much you're going to pay me each month, stuff like that. I said, well, first of all, why and how would it ever be the case that lawyers or judges would better know what the just outcome of our divorce is than the two of us if we're able to talk reasonably with each other? Second of all, if we are talking reasonably with each other, in order to get me to go along with whatever, you're going to first need to establish that it's just and correct, that in fact it's appropriate to obligate me to give you this money because of some reason that withstands scrutiny. The fact that you can find a lawyer to make some sort of case for you is not a good reason to get a lawyer. You should yourself have in your mind a clear reason why you deserve to legally bind me to giving you money before you begin the process of accomplishing that. And she still wanted to push forward with it. I got really angry about that, and I made a video articulating all of this stuff. And, she went to a lawyer. She showed him that video. And the lawyer said, you know what? I don't think you don't want to go. This is a special case. Basically said, you don't want to fuck with that guy. Since when does a lawyer tell a divorcee, that actually you don't want to fuck with your husband and try to get money from him, when the ex-husband is completely right? And it's obvious to the lawyer that this accountability arena, which forces everybody to be open, transparent to some extent, answer questions. If you're on the stand, you don't get to answer the questions you want to. You have to answer all the questions that are acceptable to ask. So, especially if you're the plaintiff in a civil matter. There was no good reason why I owed her anything. She was the one who was insisting on leaving me. And besides which, it's not like she had stayed home and raised the kids while I had used her inheritance to fund my college education, and now that I was a professional making a lot of money, I was just ditching her for a younger wife. That was not the story. If you're anti-polar, it doesn't matter to you what the story is. You just note, well, the normal protocols are this, so let's do that thing, and you're supposed to give me money, right? Look, like the incels, Candace, you need to understand, you are not women. I am not men. I'm Eric, okay? And you're fucking stupid. So you got no chance. Sex is, to me, similar to cigarettes. I don't enjoy everyone, but I need everyone. That's funny. Hi DDX, if I didn't say hi to you already. Hero M says, the society in America is weird regarding sex. The nudity in TV is considered risky or naughty, and it's rarely seen compared to other countries, yet at the same time we are obsessed with sex. And despite all this weird, mixed messages thing we have about it, oh no, we have to warn people, suggestive content, YouTube's weird, these are all the bad things you'll see in here. Partial nudity. I like how, I especially like it when they say things like, genocide, child abuse, torture, smoking. Smoking is not like those other things. Neither is nudity. But if you actually look at actual sex, or think about it, it's just a couple of idiots going like this, It's not worth the amount of attentional weight we seem to afford it for any reason at all. It's just being a dumb animal. And it's like Jordan Peterson says, you know, I met with a famous celebrity in Las Vegas, and when he arrived there as a famous sports star, an assortment of young women would be presented, and he was able to just choose which one he wanted to go home with. And don't get me wrong, that's really something. That really matters. That's really important. But at what cost? No, fucktard. That's not important. It doesn't matter. It's stupid. Don't buy into it. It's like, okay, look at this retard who doesn't get that women are people, but just thinks that they're for fucking. What a tard. And as far as needing sex, or cigarettes for that matter, important thing, sex and cigarettes are very similar. They're great as long as you only indulge in them when you need them, not as something to do when you're bored. They have the same quality, right? It's like sex is great if you only have it every 3 or 4 days, maybe, 5 days sometimes, because then you really build up some hunger for woman flesh, and then it's like, oh yeah, I'm humping you. Ew, look what I'm doing. I'm inserting my man stick in your hole and then removing it from your hole and inserting it again, and you've got boobs and everything, and it's like, yeah. It takes a few days to get that stupid again. It's stupid. There's no other way to put it. It's not even used for anything. We're not making babies. We're just running like a couple of stupid animals. Don't pay lip service to a Jordan person. And that's really something. That's important. No, it's not really something. It's a fucking tard. And these women are also tards. And that's what it is. You've got this super retarded guy who's got all this fame, and the only thing he can think to do with it is fuck a bunch of dumb hoes. That's not really something. I mean, it's really something that human beings are that fucking stupid. But it's not something to pay lip service to. It's like, on Christopher Chandler's, he traveled by himself to Alaska, and I lived out there for 116 days, and that's really something. Yeah, it's something. It's like, I have so few ideas that matter at all, that the only thing I can think to do with the next 116 days is starve out in the wilderness. So again, Jordan Peterson, don't pay lip service. Not that he did to that, but hypothetical pretend Jordan Peterson, don't pay pretend lip service to being stupid. In other words, to be more serious about it, recognize, Jordan Peterson, that implicit to reality is the fact that you're optimally configured for some sort of thing, and that other kinds of values, other sorts of things exist that aren't that sort of thing. That every sort of thing expresses as itself and as values. I mean, it's not so much that I won't debate Jordan Peterson as he won't know I exist. You know, he refuses to know I exist. Well, I mean, and all animals make a big deal out of sex. And all mammals have this, and birds too, have this sexual jealousy thing going on. It's like I was saying about the cows and the bulls, right? You got these bisons on the wilderness. The male bison spend like 10 or 15 years bulking up at the bison gym so that finally they can fuck all these cows. And it's like, okay, now I'm the biggest, baddest motherfucker around. And it's my turn to have exclusive ability to fuck all of these cows. And I will fight off everybody. I'll spend surprisingly little of my time actually fucking the cows because I am so wildly concerned with you not fucking the cows so that I can preserve my ability to fuck them without having your dirty penis around. I mean, Chris Chapin, that's for those people with that perspective, they're experiencing in order to know things. As an intuitive, I know before I experience, you know. If your intuition is instrumental and your action function is absolute value, then you're going to think the only way you can really understand things is by having experiences that push your limits or something. But I mean, that's just, it's appropriate for them, I suppose, but it doesn't generalize out and it gets projected. We all tend to do this. We project our limitations onto the world as features, not bugs. If you grew your channel larger. Look, channel largeness is like feelings, which is to say, it's like weather. It just happens to me. It's not something I do. That statement there reminds me a bit of Michelle Way's statement, where she was like, the problem is you don't even bother to show us enough typings of ESTJs. I don't choose what type people are or who pays me to type them or whether or not they choose to publish. None of those things are choices of mine. The reality is you don't get as many ESTJs as some other types because they're less likely to hire me to type them. Are SI polar types worse at dealing with grief than all other types? I don't think so. I felt very informed by my conversation with my Aunt Evelyn, who I believe is an ENFJ. It was a beautifully FE crafted scolding of my FI polar. Because, of course, she doesn't have a cognitive function map, so she's going to project wrongly without any sense of what's happening. Yeah, I've typed a few of them. I typed one not that long ago, but he didn't want to most of them don't want to publish. They don't think that getting attention outside of a TE frame of their own is a desirable thing. It just makes them vulnerable. It's like when I asked the ESTJ I typed recently, pretend you're at a restaurant and the guy sitting at the table next to you, he's just sitting there most of the time, but whenever you say something, he hurriedly starts writing it down on a piece of paper. What would you do? He really didn't like that, you know? He very much didn't like that idea. And he said, I would get up and go and say, what are you doing? To which I would, if I was that guy, I'd say, why, I'm writing down what you're saying. But why? It's so amazingly fascinating. I don't want to miss a word. I want to be able to reference it later. It would be a very difficult experiment to do. What happened with JP then? He couldn't deal with it and took to insane benzo levels? Smart man, otherwise. I mean, the same thing happened to him that happens to absolutely everybody. In the absence of a correct map, there is instead this massive pile of incorrect maps that is necessary because you don't have the correct map, right? Just like when you're being told by the church that no, everything in God's heaven is a perfect circle, and you have to make them all perfect circles, astrophysicists, then you end up with an ever more absurd and larger pile of concentric circle stacks to try to explain what is as what it's not. You know, it's just insane. But it's unavoidable if you begin with the wrong frame of reference. This is why intuitives or certain types are necessary, even though it's hard to explain why they're necessary. It's because when the intuitives don't do their job, Jordan Peterson doesn't understand why he's saying this or that or the other thing, and how it's a projection of his own attentional matrix. He sees it as he's talking about universal stuff that applies to everybody, and he's informing everybody universally about universal stuff. But he's totally not. He's just another individual like everybody else who's a set of trade-offs. If you understand your own trade-offs, you can begin to accept yourself and the world and recognize it for what it is. There aren't these grand movements of evil called not my function stack. Which type is least likely to want to publish? I don't know. INFJs generally do want to publish, though. So I would say it's not introverts, it's people with low FE. Sometimes they'll still want to publish, but they'll give the reason that, no, I think it'll be helpful for, if you think it'll be helpful adding to the data that people need to see and to have objective data to look at, then go ahead and publish. That's a TE reason to publish. How do you deal with ESTJ bosses? Well, it's very much dependent on, an ESTJ boss could be a very good boss, and if they are a good boss, they're probably best served to be implementing their own vision, which is going to be very concrete. We do these things to make money in this way. These are our protocols because they work and have worked. But if you're an intuitive and they've hired you and you keep running afoul of NI stuff with them, like, okay, well, I know that's the protocol and that's why we do it this way, But what's the overall goal here? And doesn't this begin having not just diminishing returns, but be contraindicated to that goal at a certain point because of these factors? The ESTJ boss is going to, oh look, that's just not the way the world works. In other words, they're going to feel like you're attacking their polar, and their response is going to be to try to say, no, I'm not violating TI. Because they don't get enough about NI to realize you're really critiquing their ability to intuit singular determinate things, not their logic. It's true. JP's for normies. Well, I mean, JP's a fake me, right? JP might have become a real me, but it would have required, as it did with me, the right map. Since he's operating from a wrong frame to begin with, like everything in God's heaven is a perfect circle, then all the weird math he's doing to make it be that is all just wasted energy and time. When you're talking about intellectual stuff, fruit from the poisonous tree is always poisonous, even when it's not. So, it may be the case that your poisonous tree produced this fruit that's perfectly good to eat. But, if you are eating it, you are already ignoring what matters, which is, don't pick a fruit based on whether it's edible when it comes to what's correct. Determine which tree produces always edible fruit, and then you don't need to look at the individual fruits to see if they're edible. And don't ever eat fruit from a poisonous tree, because even if it is edible and not poisonous, you shouldn't be getting fruit from that tree. Eventually, your habit of getting fruit from that tree will result in wrongness. Picking up a poison fruit, eating it, and probably you justifying that it's not poisonous because you always eat fruit from this poisonous tree. The issue is, if your ESTJ boss is implementing somebody else's vision, then you have a problem, because the person who has vision recognizes that they can't function without this ESTJ who's handling all kinds of shit, and that they need to let the ESTJ be the ESTJ. Like, I made him the boss. I can't have underlings going over his head all the time to me without undermining the authority he needs to do his job. And while I might see how the underling is right about this particular issue, that's not the underling's job to correct the ESTJ on the vision thing. So then you really have a situation where you should, whatever your vision is that you're implementing, having put the ESTJ person in the boss capacity, you should not be hiring any intuitives. Well, look, Jordan Peterson's no more retarded than Matt Dillahunty is. They both are doing the same thing, the best they can, in the presence of a bunch of wrong maps, which is worse than the absence of the correct map. If you're convinced that you've got this thing mapped out correctly, you just need to access these 36 different wrong maps and find the parts in each of the wrong maps that are correct, you're doomed, right? Because to map correctly is not to have 36 different partially correct maps. Go ahead, betting tips. You don't interrupt me. It's like I look over there when I'm done talking. if you do want to try to engage more successfully with your ESTJ boss and have fewer problems with them, then you're going to have to let them be directive. You're going to have to make them think it was their idea, basically. And you're going to have to accept that it'll be tomorrow that they agree with you that their idea was good. What type is Dr. Phil? I think he's a ISFJ. Not a very healthy ISFJ. Certainly not a particularly admirable ISFJ. He's no Vin Scully, I'll tell you that. There's an example of a great ISFJ. Dr. Phil is a rather toxic kind of ISFJ who's really poorly positioned. Who's really like, okay, if you're playing 36 occasionally correct maps and your job is to explain to people why their lack of accountability is a problem and how they need to stop being so subjective and arbitrary about themselves and stuff like that, then you are leaving wreckage in your wake at every fucking moment and disseminating false bullshit on every fucking frame imaginable. And of course, he probably has no idea. Fame may well test my morale. I doubt it, but it's possible that if I were to get super famous like Jordan Peterson or something, that I'd find it hard to stay chipper, which is what I mean by affecting my morale. If you're playing around with the word and really you're trying to suggest morality, then it would never affect my morality at all. Because while in a given public moment, if it's live, I might fail to be master of the moment, right? Like, I can think of plenty of instances where I've failed to be master of the moment. It's unavoidable. From my conversation with ESFP Club to my conversation with Erica the other day to my conversation with Arcadia Methodist. It's always going to be possible for other people who are initiating engagements with me, especially, to be the master of the moment, because I'm assuming a neutrality of purpose that they don't have and don't adhere to. I don't know who Andrew Tate is. You and Rachel can always go on the show next time we have an argument. Well, yeah. Rachel and I don't really have arguments. It's certainly not the kind of arguments that Dr. Phil fixes, but Dr. Phil has an almost pathological need to be in control of the frame of reference. You can see it all the time in saying things like, I'm sorry, but you are not coming on to my show and talking to me like that. It doesn't matter if it's your show or whatever. Just knock it the fuck off, Dr. Phil, right? Respond to what the person is saying, not the fact that they're challenging you. You fucking piece of shit. Yeah, exactly. Sometimes life attacks when your pants are down, and you're not going to be master that moment. It's just not possible. And sometimes people take advantage of them having the complete picture and being also the person who's providing you information, like what Arcadia Methodist did. They understood why they were getting my mom to go to Kaiser Hospital. They didn't want my mom to be their problem. Some probably money thing as well. Like, they were probably taking a loss on my mom because of the relationship with Medicare and stuff like that. That was their actuality. But when they talked to me, they lied, basically. So, because I'm not an expert always at spotting lies or hearing it in someone's voice on the phone, especially if they're good at lying and they're doing a very, like, bureaucratic-y thing, like talking about health insurance stuff and where my mom, which provider and who's providing services and who's paying for services and things like that. When Arcadia Methodist told me, Kaiser wants your mom in their system since you've got Kaiser health insurance. So we're going to need to find a bed for her in a Kaiser hospital. The only one we can find is Panorama City. We need your go-ahead to send her there. Right? Everything before we need your go-ahead to send her there was either a lie or in direct service to a lie. And if you're gonna be super shady, you can get away with being the master of the moment with me one time, because I will afford you the benefit of the doubt that you're not that you're not lying, that you're not fundamentally misrepresenting yourself. No, they didn't get me in the feels. They lied well. So I just assumed, well, I guess we do have Kaiser, so I guess Kaiser would prefer to have her in their hospital since they don't want to be paying Arcadia Methodist to provide services for them since they're a hospital too. I get that, right? What I didn't get was they weren't paying Arcadia Methodist. It was Medicare. But it's like none of the payment stuff ever gets conveyed between medical professionals and human beings because they're not supposed to be making decisions like that. And it's ridiculous because in a normatively correct, in a sane world, we would understand that you do not get better medical care by divorcing it from market pressures. You get worse medical care consistently across the board, just more of it. It is not a good idea for the doctors to run every possible test imaginable on my mom to be sure to eliminate the fact that she's, by doing all these tests we can eliminate, she is not dying of syphilis, she's not dying of AIDS, she's not dying of cancer, she's not dying of this. We know what she is dying of. Yeah, but we don't exactly have a test for that per se. So, since nobody's paying for it, the erroneous part there, it's either stated or on, let's just do more stuff. That way, the patient's happy. Hey, look how busy they are doing stuff. The family's happy. Well, they did everything they could. And we're happy because we're stupid doctors. So we don't use intuition and reasoning. We look at empirics. Right, if they came straight out straight off the bat said, okay, look, I'm a guy from Arcadia Methodist Hospital. So your mom got taken here, and I get it. You probably have no idea how the financials of this shit work, but it's actually, she has Kaiser insurance. We're required to treat her here. You're not required to pay us. Medicare is going to have to pay us, but they only pay us a little portion of what the actual costs are. We're taking a loss here. We'd rather her be in your health insurance system, where since you have Kaiser health insurance, they have Kaiser hospitals. If she's there, then the insurance that you presumably are paying for each month is being required to provide the services. So it's fairer. That would have sold me on it immediately and 100%. Well, there's nothing wrong with using empirics, okay? Empirics are great to use, provided you know what you're doing with them and why. So, when I took Rachel to see a nurse practitioner about Rachel's neuropathy symptoms, when they took a sudden turn for the worse briefly, basically when she experienced, this was quite a ways back, but not that long after the toxic drug interaction that caused her neuropathy, she experienced incontinence. In other words, the neuropathy was so bad she couldn't just not feel her fingers and toes at all. She couldn't feel all the way up to her waist. Like, was just numb, you know? She couldn't tell whether she was peeing or not. We took her to the doctor down there, and it was a nurse practitioner we got. So she said, well, I explained to her what had happened, and that the reason we were there was because we'd been told before, if she ever experiences incontinence, take her immediately to the doctor or the hospital. This woman heard what I said, and that there was serotonin syndrome and and then proceeded to say, okay, well, we're going to need to test for her electrolytes levels, her B vitamins levels, her meow levels, her meow levels, her meow levels. I said, okay, so this test that you're suggesting here, what are the possible outcomes of this test? Like, she could test abnormal in this direction, or normal. If she tests abnormal in this direction, what conclusions are we going to draw from that? He said, well, then we can eliminate that this has been caused by meow. We can already eliminate that. I told you what this was caused by. I just told you. But the doctor, the nurse practitioner, doesn't want to listen to me, doesn't want to use any kind of intuition or reasoning. We can eliminate that possibility for various reasoning things. She doesn't care. She wants to look at the data to eliminate that possibility. Of course, the fact that there are infinite possible things that she could theoretically test for and eliminate as possibilities does not help us at all. It doesn't help us solve the actual problem that Rachel's experiencing, and it doesn't provide us a diagnosis because she's not testing for something, she's testing for the absence of something. Of course, what the patient actually needs to have any kind of ability to move forward in her life from this disabling event is clarity about its cause and therefore its nature. We had that clarity, except for the fact that every time we went to see a doctor, they decided to start over this process again. I'd explained to them she has neuropathy caused by a toxic drug interaction and serotonin syndrome, and we'd like her not to have these bad symptoms. And the doctor would say, okay, well, let's figure out what's really going on here. I just told you what's really going on here, you fucking tard. The neurologist insisted that, okay, the first thing you need to do is, first he asks about nitrous oxide. Do you ever do nitrous oxide? Yeah. Well, you need to stop that immediately. Okay, that causes neuropathy? Worsens it or something? Oh, terrible. You need to stop it immediately. So, again, at this point, I'm still trusting these medical professionals to be competent. I hadn't yet learned from my experience of multiple instances that they're all fucking tards. When I go home and actually research the matter and look at the article in the medical journal that indicates a linkage between nitrous oxide and neuropathy, it's not like the person who wrote that peer-reviewed journal article was lying. All the information was in there to realize that his conclusions were completely fucking bullshit and unjustified. That alternate explanations that he included in the thing as reasons I could see were determinate. He published a whole paper claiming to establish a linkage between nitrous oxide and neuropathy that he totally failed to establish. Then this neurologist just reads the headline of this fucking thing and tells some person he's just met, without asking him any fucking questions, that they need to stop doing nitrous oxide. It's really bad. He has no fucking clue why he thinks that, except he read a title in some medical journal, right? If he were smart at all, he would have asked me and Rachel, what was the precipitating event or the antecedent? What was the antecedent to the symptoms? What's the time proximity we're looking at? What do you think happened right before you started experiencing these symptoms? How long was that before? And why do you think those things are linked? That's where anybody should ask first of those things, right? Even our super smart psychiatrist, INTP doctor, he didn't get the idea that we need a definitive diagnosis because how we behave going forwards is contingent on that. We need to know, is this something that's not going to get any worse, maybe not going to get better, maybe slightly get better over time? Or is this something that's going to get worse because it's caused by something degenerative? Or something like diabetes, you know? Rachel's dad has neuropathy from diabetes. And he's telling Rachel advice about dealing with neuropathy, except his neuropathy is not caused by a toxic drug interaction and is subject to a very different set of rules accordingly. The diagnosis matters, right? If you have neuropathy because of diabetes, you really need to watch your diet a lot. If you have neuropathy because of a toxic drug event that occurred one time, you don't need to watch your diet at all. And a lack of intuition, a lack of reasoning, a lack of intelligence causes doctors, medical professional doctors, to do this all the time. To say, well, diet's important in cases with neuropathy because almost all neuropathy is caused by diabetes. And not get that you have to understand why something's important in order to say it is important. So empiric gathering is bad medicine unless you know why you're gathering the empirics. And doctors don't. They just think, well, nobody's paying for it, so we might as well run some more tests and eliminate some other things. We came here so that you could tell us what's wrong and fix the problem. You want to not fix the problem and indefinitely tell us what's not wrong. That makes you completely fucking retarded. The fact that I and the person, Rachel and I both, but mostly me, Rachel was understandably swayable by these medical professionals who speak so confidently. Her INTP psychiatrist, after I said, no, we did get her tested for diabetes, he says, no, right here, look. He's like, I don't trust that test. Well, why not? Well, it doesn't have these other numbers that it usually has. Okay, well, actually, when I looked on the back, it did have those numbers. I was showing you the part here on the front that doesn't have those numbers. But even if they did issue me a report without those numbers, it says that definitely does not have diabetes. You are so interested in it being something that you already can explain and know, and it not being that Eric successfully diagnosed her and none of these medical professionals did, that you don't give a fuck even about the empirics. I mean, that is, with the INTP doctor, it definitely links to cognitive functions. It's NI countervalued. He doesn't think it matters to have a definitive single answer that is conclusive. He doesn't get the fact that that impacts the patient's experience a lot. Why would it? Everybody needs to operationally continue to ideate other possibilities, even when it's ill-advised. But the nurse practitioner, who was stunned to hear me even asking these kind of questions, like, okay, well, you're testing for this, so what conclusions will you draw if meow? What conclusions will you draw if meow? And what conclusions will you draw if meow? Well, I mean, if it's normal, we'll know it's not caused by that. And if it's abnormally high, will we know it is caused by that? Well, no. If it's abnormally low, will we know it is caused by that? No. Are abnormally high or low levels in this necessarily linked to neuropathy? Or is there a direct understanding of the mechanism by which these off levels produce those symptoms? No. And not understanding that was determinate in the matter. You know? Yeah, I can talk about stepping outside of one's cognitive comfort zone, sure. For me, it's stepping outside of my cognitive comfort zone to trust the process. You know, I don't like processes that don't require me to have vision or knowledge up front, that instead are supposed to provide the answers. Like, you know, any Mr. Miyagi of me is going to fall on deaf ears and fisticuff resistant punching. Don't tell me to wax on and wax off without telling me why, what I'm going to learn, what your paradigm here is as an educator, your pedagogy, how it is that this task you're assigning me links to a desired learning outcome. You don't need to worry about that stuff. You just trust the process. You just fuck the process off, you know? You wax on and wax off my shit. I won't tell you why. How about that, motherfucker? But I'm the sensei, you're the student. Well, you're not any kind of sensei that deserves any kind of respect from me, because you're not explaining, you're not letting me control the process. Of course, from my perspective, the student should control the process, but that's because I'm always smarter than whoever's trying to teach me anything. You know? It's always been that way. It becomes gradually clear to me or now increasingly quickly clear to me, that, wait a second, the reason I'm not understanding this person is because they aren't making any sense. So, but there are certain things where you do need to trust the process. Like, look, just let me work the way I work, and you'll see the magic outcomes. I get that. People need to be afforded the space to do the work the way they work, right? When it comes to art making, I will be somebody who will very much say, trust the process. I don't know. I'm an NI ignorer. Trust me, as we're getting there, you're going to hear a lot of terrible ideas and bad things, right, in this music making process. That's how I figure out the good stuff. It's understandable you might think, oh shit, there's so many bad things here being presented to me early on that there can't be a good outcome down there, because you're assuming I know they're bad that I put them out there because I don't know they're bad, or I think they're good. But instead, I put them out there so I can look at them to see if they're bad or good. That's the process for me, you know? So everybody needs to be afforded the space to work the way they work. However, if the way you work makes it such that a total layperson like me is the only medical professional who can actually correctly diagnose Rachel, then the way you work is inadequate for your job. You're trying to dissect the anatomy. You're trying to dissect a bad trip here. You're trying to postmortem a bad trip. Why was it so bad? Yeah, I've been on bad trips, for sure. High FE is a double-edged sword, makes you weird about the vibes, etc., or is that a function of bad SC? Well, it's like I was saying to Rachel, I think, last night. I suspect INFJs may be the only FE people who truly hate FE. They truly hate it. It's for the same reason that I kind of hate being right. When you're that right about things and understand all the nuances of something, and you're just continually assaulted by the ignorant wrongnesses of others on those things, like everybody else not getting it, thinking they're just Dunning-Krugering the fuck out of FE and I, basically. Even smart people like me, just Dunning-Krugering the living fuck out of FE and I constantly around you, and it's operationally valued, so you don't actually think it matters per se, just that what does matter requires you to engage that way. Then you're gonna get very frustrated in the same way that I am, except unlike me, you don't, because FE is the thing you're frustrated about, you don't get to yell at people and call them retarded and stuff like that, and be right and show how much smarter you are than everybody else and fuck off, and then incur the inherent pushback from that, which you're well prepared to make them pay for. Instead, you just go, oh, Jesus. They both don't understand, and even with my excellent FE, I probably am not going to be able to make them understand everything, because they're going to be like 99.9% of the people in the world, defensive first. Defensive first. So much so that even when talking with me, Rachel is very cautious in her phrasing of things. I asked her directly, like, what are your observations about my emotional awareness and how I'm emotionally dealing with these things that I recognize as stuff that causes people to break down and cry and become dysfunctional and stuff like that for stretches of time. Death in the family, big life changes and stuff. What are your observations about my emotional processing here? Because I don't have good clarity about, like, I understood when I talked to my aunt, oh, she's kind of pointing out to me here, why aren't you caring more about these people? You're telling me about the practicalities, and I talked to this doctor, and he said they're moving him there, and this is the health insurance stuff, and this is where she is now, and this is how my dad is now, but why are you feeling nothing? Why are you in a chipper mood and laughing and talking to me like this when these horrible things are happening? So I asked Rachel what her perceptions of my emotional processing were, and she started to say, you haven't processed this emotionally at all, basically. But before she said it that way, she kind of paused and she said, you haven't had time yet at the moment to really do the emotional processing. She thought she needed to give me cover, right? Like, because people are so defensive and never want to see anything as a deficit of the self that if you're FE wise, you phrase things like that, right? So that it's not you suck at meow. It's, look how overwhelmed you are. You haven't even had time to process these things. She's saying you haven't processed it for shit. You're not processing anything. You don't process it until later. You're doing your FI blind as it could be. And it's one of those things that if I'm asking you a question about me, I need no FE from you to process your answer correctly. I found Rachel's answer more interesting because it came with this additional observation I was able to make about her FE. So it gave me something intellectually interesting to hold on to. Whereas the actual answer to the question is just so straightforward that it's like everything FI, I can't do anything with it really. Well, you haven't processed it emotionally at all. Occasionally you have this weird kind of childlike looking up from your toys and remembering that mommy's dead, and then you burst into tears, but then you go back into playing with your toys and forget all about it again. That's the reality of it, Eric. But she's not going to tell me that because she gets that almost nobody deals with things not defensively first. Well, Andre, it's not a waste of time, and it's not just extra stress. It's affording the people in your life the importance they deserve. When my Aunt Evelyn basically suggested that we bring my mom home for her last few days. No. My thought was that's a horrible idea. That just is a whole bunch of hassle of moving this stuff and putting her there and then displacing us for a few days. No, that's not what my mom wants. She's comfortable where she is. It's not what any of us want at all. For my mom's last few days to be filled with a bunch of SETE shit, is what I think. And she said, well, we decided to do this with Julie to keep her in the hospital and not bring her home as well. But we made sure to spend as much time as we could those last few days with her at her side. It was just important for us all to be together, even if she didn't know us, recognize us, or whatever. Well, I mean, that phenomenon is different than this one for a number of reasons. That was your daughter who had brain cancer at 50, and it went from melanoma, a skin cancer that seemed not particularly dramatically important or anything, to dead in about a year. Instead, what we're looking at is, from my perspective, my mom is not this person that I see in front of me now at all. My mom, I was able to spend a lot of time with her as she transitioned from my mom into this really unpleasant, scared person into this incredibly pleasant and sweet childlike thing, into nothing. And so, from my perspective, to go and spend a lot of time next to nothing, this empty shell of where my mom used to be, is not a good idea to do it too much anyway. Like, I do think that we all need to be physically present for her last day or two for more hours than we would otherwise be physically present, simply to give ourselves time to feel how important this person has been to us. But my dad's understanding of that phenomenon, which is her dying is a dramatic change from her being alive, is very different than my understanding of it, which is her dying represents the end of a torturously long and tragic process to watch happen to my mom. My mom doesn't want this. She's not even capable of wanting things anymore. But she never would have wanted this, and she's already dead. What her body persisting is not especially relevant to anything. Going and looking at her withered, stroke mad body in either at best a wheelchair, probably in a hospice bed, is a necessary part of the life events thing, right? She deserves, and we deserve, to pretend to be a family again, for a little while. Pretend that that's my mom. But for my dad, it's not pretend. And it's because he's anti-polar, and he's so susceptible to slow boil, he doesn't really remember my mom as she used to be. He had to be told by my Aunt Evelyn that my mom had dementia well into it. And I did too. Ignoring. I didn't recognize, I was getting increasingly mad at my mom for being so, unreasonable and increasingly unpleasant, because I didn't get that she had dementia. And of course, my dad doesn't tell me things like that until he decides it's the right time for us to be told. He told me and Delilah at the same time. It was years, it's like, I of course have nobody to blame regarding that but myself, because I could have gone over here more. I could have spent more time with my parents. I was busy doing my own thing, you know? And I could have spent more time thinking about why is my mom like this instead of just us operating with my dumb SI assumption, right? Which is my mom's the continuation of what she's always been, and she always had within her this capacity to be unreasonably against newness. So I guess she's just indulging in that bad habit of hers, and I'm getting mad at her now. Well, that's SI dumbness, right? My NI tool, ENFJ aunt, when she finally came and visited with my mom and dad together, she immediately told my dad, your wife has dementia and is fairly far along, and he had not noticed anything, you know? Meanwhile, my mom had been secretly writing down, I found this book one time of her writing down words that she was starting to forget, but keeping that from my dad. Like, so, you know, this issue of how I should feel, or what I should feel, or what we should do in order to attend to feelings matters is causing me interaction challenges with everybody right now, because the doctor who's calling to sell me on hospice care is assuming I'm like a regular person who's gonna be like, well, okay, what exactly you mean? What do you mean she won't go back to the hospital? Then you're just saying go off and die. Well, yes, I get that. That's the whole point of hospice, is that we don't have to continue this farce any longer. Yes, of course I approve it. Yes, I understand what it means. Why do you keep meowing around? Well, because your mom's dying and you're supposed to be super emotional and difficult and not rational. Except that doesn't impact me like that. I mean, I plan to go see her as soon as she gets back in San Marino, now that I can. It's like, well, Rachel and I went to see her, and then close to a month passed where we just didn't go to see her again for just selfish reasons. Then we got COVID. And now we're both finally over COVID, so we can go see her again. But we both felt it would be irresponsible for us to go see her when we had COVID. Now remember, during all of this time, things are the same. This very, very slow incremental change downhill that looks and feels to all of us, including my dad, me, and Rachel, like she could live till she's 90. You know, her body doesn't seem to be failing very quickly. It's just she's lost all of her identity. And then, abruptly out of nowhere, at the end of our COVID self-quarantine, I'm not going to visit her, we get this, two things happen in very quick succession. My dad takes her to the neurologist. The neurologist informs my dad she's got not that much time left. He returns her to Sunrise. They look at her and say, she seems like she's really sick, and send her to the hospital. Then the hospital says, okay, it's hospice time. It's not that Rachel and I and my dad won't take advantage of the time we had left to visit her. And yet it's also the case that, let's say she lives another 25 days. And Rachel and I, let's say she does successfully get back to Sunrise today. Supposedly she's going to be discharged to Sunrise today, but it's Saturday, so I don't know. We'll see what happens. And we go and visit her. And sure enough, it's the same as it's always been, except now there's some additional things, like she's not eating. She was switched over to a liquids diet because she wasn't eating solid foods anymore. Except that's not something that we can perceive in our engagement with her. It's the same as it's always been. Mom's not there. we're there pretending like mom's there and putting on a little show and taking pictures of mom and engaging with her primarily so we can show my dad that we've done it. That's the truth of it, right? Because again, Boba Fett, you think this is my mom. This is not my mom. It's the absence of my mom we're visiting. And while she may still have some experience, that it's important that we keep her, make sure that she's comfortable and as least tortured by this miserable thing that's happening to her as possible. Our being there doesn't help at all. Doesn't help her. She doesn't necessarily want it or not want it. It helps my dad feel like I care. I do care. So as a consequence, I'm not enthusiastic about pretending. Yeah, I'm an only kid. Really? Was there a quick... Did he have sudden onset dementia or something? Or was that at the end of a long, slow process? Oh, is that premiering right now or what? Is it 8 a.m.? Is that premiere time? I was going to end this before that premiered. So yeah, I'm going to end this video now. Thanks for being here. I don't want to cannibalize my other video. I love you all. You guys are the best. And I appreciate having this place to talk this stuff out. Don't forget to eat plenty of cheese. Remember, death isn't the end of life. It's the beginning of death.